a random shtickle Torah is, and like, oh, the Rambam is B'chinas Mashiach Ben David, but I want to investigate that in Nakuda more, how the Rambam is Mashiach Ben David, and sort of not necessarily in specific sugis, but just the general picture of Mishnah Torah, how you see that Mishnah Torah B'chalal is sort of Geula in Torah form, and then it's just a matter of us catching up to it. That's what you're talking about. So that's what I was just working on today. Say it again. The Rishner, right? It's famous from the Rishner, but there's earlier Makaris also. I'll tell you like this again. Don't tell anyone because this is huh? We're already live. There's a lashon in the we talk about, everyone knows Mashiach is the beginning of Torah Mashiach. Baal Shem Tov is the beginning of Torah Mashiach. And so anyone familiar with the shul definitely knows that there's one particular pasuk that's always associated with the Baal Shem in that way of being the beginning of Gula, and that's There's a lashon of the Rambam in one of his letters. It's part of a more famous letter. The letter he talks about, it's a letter written to the Chachmei Lunil. Lunil was a province in France that were very kosher to the Rambam, and so they would have a lot of tshuvas back. And a lot of the tshuvas that we have from the Rambam in learning are to the Chachmei Lunil. So, by the way, there's a sefer we have, the Ri Lunil, a Pirush Rabbi Yonasan Lunil. So the assumption is that anything he wrote is based on the Rambam. It's understanding the Rambam. So, Pshatim in the Ri Lunil shed a lot of light on the Rambam. But anyway, so in this letter that he wrote to the Chachmei Lunil, he talks about, he gets very personal. And he has Lashonis over there, the Mamish, he says about himself, he paraphrases a pasuk in Yirmiyah about himself. It says a pasuk, Hashem says to Yirmiyah Hanavi, Miterem etzarcha mibeten yidaticha, that before you were formed in your mother's womb, I knew you, and I already designated you for a shlichus. So Rambam says that about himself, that the Torah knew me before I was created and designated me for a shlichus. The lashon is sheyifutzu ma'inaseh chutza, that I should be the one to send. Again, at least such a lashon, such a lashon is very stark. Even later on in that letter, he talks about what he tried to do in Mishnah Torah. And he references a pasuk talking about Mashiach of Echad Meir Shtayim and Mishpacha, trying to gather Yidden from different places. Mashiach does it. He says that's what I was trying to do in Mishnah Torah too. So that's easy. Yeah. There's a letter from the Baal Tanya. The Baal Tanya. I can't give away everything from Shuas Night, but at least the intro. So the intro is okay. You're not. Yeah. There's a letter from There's a letter from the Baal Tanya that they sent him. The first sefer from Chassidus that was printed is Toldos Yaakov Yosef. So there was a public burning of Toldos Yaakov Yosef after it was printed by the Misnagdim. So I don't know exactly if they asked the Baal Tanya what to do or just the Baal Tanya preempted it, whatever. So Baal Tanya says he was telling his Chassidim or whatever, whoever was listening, you don't have to take on the banner of fighting for the Baal Shem Tov. He said this is already his lashon is, to you this is new events, but really this is old. Because the Rambam already wrote Svarim, and people that didn't understand the depth of the Rambam also burnt his Svarim and gave him his Nagdas. But you see, hundreds of years later, the Rambam, everyone. So he said the same thing's going to be with the Baal Shem. It's a dimion. So he's such an dimion. Anyway, so that will be Yeshua's night. That's Hashem, I think. That's what I was working on today. Okay. All right, so. So last week, Monday night was Lag Boimer, so we didn't have a chance to do this year. So I figured that we'll use that as an excuse to talk about a mitzvah from last week's parasha, if that's okay. So the truth is, we're not going to talk about one specific mitzvah, really more of a category of mitzvahs that sort of shed light on a general idea. So the nigla part of tonight is not going to be as complicated as usual. It'll be very straightforward. The Nister part will be a little bit on the more complicated side, so you're not getting away that easy, So either way, something's got to give. All right, so in last week's parsha, we had a number of mitzvahs revolving around how a yid let's say an owner, balabas, is supposed to relate to his Eved Ivri, right? So there's an idea of a yid that becomes a slave. There's different types. Bezdin, person can sell himself as a slave, a Jewish slave sold by Bezdin, steal something he can't pay back. Different halachas, but in either case, in Eved Ivri, so the guy's still a yid, 100%. Basically, nothing changes except for one huge thing, is that he's allowed to marry a shivcha kananis, which is for a regular yid. That's you're not allowed to do such a thing. She's not Jewish enough for a regular yid, but he's allowed to marry shivcha kananis. That's the din of an Eved Ivri. So we have a number of psukim in last week's parasha talking about the relationship that the owner has to have towards the Eved Ivri. What type of relationship do they have? So we'll investigate that in halacha for just a little bit. It's not too complicated. There's not that many places in Shas and Bavli where these halachas are discussed. They're more fleshed out. These mitzvahs are more fleshed out in the Medrash, Taras Kahanim, and Sifra, different places. So, but the Rambam, we'll see how the Rambam puts it all together. And again, as it always is, in the Rambam, there's makaris from all over the place, but he puts it together in his way. So we'll see that, and then we'll see in the Pnimis what it means for us. And again, just to chazer over what we already know, which is that whenever you enter into Pnimius, the mitzvah becomes much more expansive and much more relevant beyond just the situation of Eved Ivri. Okay, so let's begin like this. Number one, you have a couple psukim again from last week's parsha. So in these couple psukim, we have three lavin that are mentioned. So we'll just go through the pasuk, and then we'll see how each lav is defined in halacha. So it says like this: if one of your brothers, says the pasuk, becomes poor, and so in other words, now he's in a situation where he needs to sell himself, and he's sold to you. So now, in other words, an Eved Ivri. Lav number one: you're not allowed to make him work the work of a slave. Okay, he is a slave. I mean, that's why he's selling himself. So what does it mean avodas ovid? That's what we'll see. But that's lav number one. Then the pasuk continues: Kisacher ketoishav yeh imach. You should be treated as a hired worker, a sacher, right? A hired worker, or a toishav, or someone that's just staying by your house. For room and board. So he does a few things around the house. That's how he should be treated. Again, vague, practically, but we'll see soon. And he should work until Yovel. Okay. The pasuk continues: all Klal Yisrael are my servants. I took them out of Mitzrayim. Okay. Now we're introduced to lav number two. Lo yimachru memkeres aved. A Jew cannot be sold as a slave, as the selling of a slave. You can't sell a yid. Can't be sold, or even selling himself in the same way as an Eved is sold. Okay. So that's lav number two. Again, we have to know what that means. And finally, lav number three: Lo sirda by befarach. Don't work him befarach. Avodas parach means I don't know how they translate it by Pesach. Avodas parach, heavy labor, heavy work, something like that. We'll see what that means. Don't make him work avodas parach. Okay, so these are the three lav that we have. Not to work him what's called avodas aved, that he shouldn't be sold in a way of memkeres aved, and he can't work avodas parach. Those are the three lavim. Each one of them is not explained. Okay, so like I said, in the Medrash, that's really where it becomes clear. Even Rashi and Chumash brings down some of these pshatim, but we'll see how the Rambam presents it. Okay, Marmukah number two. So these lavin are talked about in the Rambam in the first parak of Hilchos Avadim, specifically the second half of the parak. So parak aleph halacha hey. So the first law the Rambam deals with is, in fact, the second one in the pasuk, which is not to sell an Eved, or an Eved can't be sold, an Eved Ivri can't be sold in a way of memkeres Eved. So what does that mean? So says the Rambam, whether a person is selling himself, or Bezdin is selling him, if he's a Yid and he's being sold as an Eved Ivri, nimkar bifar hesia. He cannot be sold in public. Al Eved HaMekach on the selling stone, v'loy besimta, or the specific designated corner or area, kederach she'avadim nimkarim, the way avadim are usually sold. In other words, the Rambam over here in Hilchos Avadim is not 100% clear on what he means, but in Sefer Mitzvahs, the Rambam explains a little bit more in detail. Over there, the Rambam explains that the way an Eved was usually sold was through bidding. In other words, the Eved would be put on a platform or a specific area, and it was b'far hesi. In other words, people would come, a bunch of people would come and they would bid, and he would be sold to the highest bidder. That's how it was. That's how Avadim were sold. Says the Rambam, that's what the pasuk means. Lo yimachru kerasav. The Eved Ivri cannot be sold in a way that usually slaves are sold, which is in this way of bifra hesia aleven amekach. It can't be done like that. Shenemar lo yimachru kerasav. That's the pasuk means that he can't be sold in the way of avodim. Einay nimkar el betzina b'derech kavod. It has to be sold privately in a b'kavodik way. In other words, if you know someone is being sold as a slave, so then you go and you speak and you give your price, whatever it is. But on this public way and with bidding and so on, and it's niyastik away. He has his price, whatever his value is designated as, and a customer comes and sees if it's a good shidduch. But none of this public display of bidding. Okay, so that's the first lav, or the second lav of the pasuk, lo yimachru kerasav. Okay, then the Rambam number 3, the next halacha vav. The Rambam now deals with the third halacha of lo sirda by beforech, of not working him avodas parach. What does that mean, avodas parach? So it says the Rambam like this: Kol Eved Ivri aser la'avoy by beforech. Right, and Eved Ivri is also not allowed to be worked. What's defined as avodas parach? The Eza avodas parach. So says the Rambam, what is the definition of avodas parach? Hard work, and that's too relative. So what does it mean? Zuaf. So Rambam says two gedarim, two stipulations, and we'll have to see sort of to unify them. What exactly is the real definition? But says the Rambam like this: Zu avodah she'ein la kitzba. First of all, it's an avodah. What's defined as avodas parach is one type of work. It might not be physically difficult, but it doesn't have an end to it. There's no end time for this type of work. He's going to give an example. V'avodah she'ein tzarich la, or another case of avodas parach would be an avodah that maybe has an end, but it's meaningless. It's useless. There's no real tachlis in what the person is doing. So says the Rambam like this: Elatia machshavti l'havida bovad. And the only reason why you tell the Eved to do such a thing is because you just want him to work. You don't want him to get lazy. So you just want to keep him busy, right? Shlo yavatal. You shouldn't just sit there and do nothing. Either, the truth is, the Mefarshim do point out that if you do see the Eved Ivri becoming lazy, and you feel like it's necessary for him to develop a work ethic, then maybe it's okay. But just the guy feels like I have an Eved, he should be doing something, it's a waste of my money, things like that. But you don't really have any. What you ask him to do is meaningless to you. That's avodas parach. So either an avodah that's open-ended, it doesn't have an end time, or a meaningless avodah. Mikan amr chachamim. So the Chazal in the Medrash is what he's quoting. From here, chachamim say in the Medrash the following example: Shlo yomer lai, that you shouldn't tell your Eved Ivri, ador tachas akafanim, dig and make soften the earth under the vineyard. Until I come back. Now that work that he's doing is meaningful. It's significant. You want the earth to be soft under the vineyard, but you didn't give him a time. You didn't say until 6 o'clock, until 8 o'clock. You just said until I come back. When are you coming back? So he's always going to be looking at his watch or looking at the door. When is he coming? That's called ein l'kitzba. That's called without an end. That's called avodas parach. Eli yomer lai. Rather, what should you tell him? You should say adar ad shal ploinus. You tell him, do this malacha until this and this time. Ayad makim pliny, or until you reach that particular area in the vineyard. But there has to be an end, a clear end that he sees in sight. That's the first example. The chayin is another example. Lo yomer lai. Don't tell him chafar makim zed, dig this specific area. So there is a specific. It's a malacha that has a kitzpah, but you don't need that area to be dug. Or vafilu hachim like kaishel chamin, or even something that's small, something that's not a tircha. Heat up a cup of water, or cool down a cup of water. Then it's tzarich, but again, you don't need a cup of water. So that's aser. And these examples, you violate the loisasei shnemar loisirda by befarach. And the Rambam repeats, the only malacha that you're allowed to have an Eved Ivri do, el davar katzav, something that has a specific end to it, shehu tzarich loy, that you need. But if it's open-ended or you don't need it, then that's called avodas parach. Okay, so obviously these are two gedarim. These are both recorded in the Medrash. These two, stipulations of what avodas parach means. Okay, so you could be these are two independent definitions of what avodas parach means. To unify them. Maybe when we get to the themis, maybe it'll become a little bit more clear what I'm about to say. But the definition over here of avodas parach means a malacha that is for a purpose, but is not the purpose itself. See, the definition, philosophically speaking, the Rambam uses this concept a lot in Mar Nevuchim. When you have something, there's a basic rule in reality, which is like cause and effect, or means to an end. When you have something when malacha has to be defined as a means towards an end. You have to give the Eved a malacha. Eved Ivri is supposed to work. That's why he's there. But the type of malacha that you have to give him is a malacha which has a tachlis. It's not the tachlis by itself. It has a tachlis. In order for the malacha to have a tachlis and for it to be defined as an endeavor which is to result in a tachlis, well, you need two things. You need, first of all, for there to be a tachlis, number one, and number two, it has to, by its very definition, have an end to it, because the nature of that which is a means towards an end is that it's not forever. And so when you have a malacha that is open-ended, in other words, what you're saying is that this malacha is not there to accomplish X, Y, Z. It is its own inyan, and that's avodas parach. So avodas parach is defined as giving an Eved Ivri malacha where, like as if you're saying to him, work, makes you free, right? That's the lashon. So that's terrible. That's avodas parach, because work is there to result in a tachlis, and for that to happen, there has to be a clear tachlis at the end, and there has to be an end to the malacha that you then go into tachlis. But if the malacha just keeps on going, or it's theoretically open-ended, then that's no longer seen as a malacha which is there to lead to a tachlis, but it's just malacha, and that's avodas parach. That's avodas parach. Okay, so that's the second lav of, again, leisir devay b'farach. Then finally, the third lav, or the first one according to Chumash, that the Rambam talks about is don't work him avodas aved. So we had avodas parach already, but now there's another thing that's called avodas eved. What does that mean? So Marmaka number 4, halacha zayin. Kol Eved Ivri, every Eved Ivri, asir li Yisrael shakenehu, the owner of the Eved Ivri is forbidden lahavidai b'dvarim baizim, to make him work, even if it's not avodas parach. So it's going to be finite and it has a tachlis, but the malacha that you're asking him to do is mavuzadik. It's disgraceful. What does that mean, disgraceful? Shem yichodim la'ases ha'avadim. These are things that avodim do, not regular people, but it just happens to be he's owned by someone else. These are avodim dikim malachas. What is an eved dikim malacha? Kagayin sheyoylach achrav kelev l'beis hamerchat. So the guy's going to the bathhouse, so he has his eved schlep his robe with him for him. That's an eved dikim malacha. The whole inyan of what he's doing is simply just to serve the master. That's a mavuzah dikim malacha, and it's unbecoming for an eved ivri. Or to take his shoes off of him, right? Shenemar leisavid by avodas aved. That's the first lav, leisavid by avodas aved. And anoyeg by al kisacher. In other words, that's the next pasuk. You should treat him like you would a hired hand. In other words, shenemar kisacher katoshav yeimach. The way it's explained is as follows: just as someone that is hiring himself out is b'derech klal not hiring himself out to take off your shoes for you. Right? That's not a job that anyone would hire themselves out for. Why are you hiring yourself out? Well, I'm a good tailor, so you want to hire me as your tailor. That's a type of mentality you have to have for the Eved Ivri. But a type of avodah which no normal person would derech klal hire themselves out to do. So that's something that you're not allowed to have an Eved Ivri do for you as well. So the Rambam says the following added knech: Umotu lasaper loisarai. Ulachabis like susai, ulafis like yisasai. Now, an Eved Ivri is allowed to give his balabas a haircut. He's allowed to do laundry for him. He's allowed to cook his food and so on. So those things, although they're things that maybe this guy wasn't doing before he was an Eved Ivri, those are not mavuzadik malachas. They're not those malachas are not as fundamentally making him, just a secondary to the balabas. These are malachas that there are barbers out there, and there are laundrymen, people that do laundry, and there are cooks out there. So it's not a crazy thing to have your Eved Ivri do. But here's an interesting halacha. It says the Rambam. So in other words, the way the Rambam is formulating this final lav is as follows: there are certain malachas which are fundamentally mavuzadik and evidik, and those things you're not allowed to have your Eved Ivri do. That means anything that a normal person would not see as their parnasa and as their normal malacha. Just again, it's not an official title of robe schlepper. That's not a title. So if that's not a title, you can't have your Eved Ivri do it. What is a title maybe is barber. Okay, so fine. So if you want to have your Eved Ivri be your barber, that's fine. But now says the Rambam another interesting halacha. You could have him as your barber, but let's say I have my Eved Ivri, and he's what he did before he was an Eved Ivri, he was an accountant. He was an accountant, and something happened, whatever it is, he sold himself as an Eved Ivri. I say, you know what? I'm not interested in having an accountant as an Eved Ivri. I would like my Eved Ivri to start a barbershop, and all the money that comes into the barbershop will go to me. So I want you to become a barber now. So it says the Rambam, you can't do that either. I could have him as my personal barber because being a barber is not that's a job. That's fine. But for me to officially make that his occupation now is barber, that I can't do either. So whatever occupation, so the Rambam says an interesting chiddush, as we'll see in a second. Whatever occupation this guy had before, that has to remain his occupation. That is occupation. Just happens to be now that he's an Eved, the money that comes in through his occupation goes to me because I'm his Baal Bas. Okay, fine. And anything that I want him to do personally outside of the 9-to-5 job that his occupation is, I can have him do for me as long as those are also occupations. But what I cannot do is have him do things which are not occupations, like taking off my shoes, things like that. And even things that are occupations, if that's not his occupation, I can't make that his occupation, all day long. So that's the halacha that says, let's just read it together. Again, it says the Rambam. Again, let's start from 4 again. We'll see it together. Call Eved Ivri again. Any Eved Ivri that's bought, his owner cannot make him work mevuzadik, embarrassing, subjugating type of jobs. Things that only avodim do. These are not professions that regular people do. These are specific things that if you're an Eved, you do them. It's like bringing your clothing to the bathhouse, or taking off your shoes. Again, you have to treat him like a hired hand. Just instead of him being hired and the deal is for a month, so he's an Eved Ivri. But fundamentally, you have to treat him like he's a hired person. It says the Rambam. So whatever is not a profession, you can't make him do, and things that are a profession, you can make him do for you, but not necessarily for everyone else if that's not his personal profession.
What if it's the master's profession?
Doesn't make a difference. It's not his profession. So even if the guy he owns a bakery. He owns a bakery. I can't have my Eved Ivri be just my baker if that's not his avodah before. Now, obviously, as a Baal Bas, if I'm buying an Eved Ivri, and I know that I want my Eved Ivri to work in the bakery, so I'm going to look for an Eved Ivri that was a baker. But or forget Eved Ivri. Obviously, you'll see how the Rambam ends off.
I'm having a hard time understanding why someone would want an Eved Ivri as opposed to just hiring a soccer.
Well, the Gemara says it's because of this. The Gemara says one of the reasons kol kaina Eved Ivri la'atzma kilo kaina adam la'atzma. If you buy an Eved Ivri, you're buying a boss, because you have to. These are all, by the way, the halachas of what you're allowed to make him work and so on. Then there's another halacha which we're not even getting into tonight, which is the pasuk says somewhere else in Chumash, kitayv lo imach, that the Eved Ivri has to have a good situation by you, and the meaning of that is whatever your standards are for living, the Eved Ivri has those standards. And as until now, the Eved Ivri has been very poor and living in a shack, but you're a wealthy person, you live in a mansion, and you bought an Eved Ivri. Well, guess what? He's now living in the mansion like you. So it's not a good business. It's not a good business to buy Eved Ivris. It's not such a good idea. So it says the Rambam, right? The Eved Ivri is allowed to give you haircuts. Being a barber is a profession. Like susai, or to launder your clothing. Or to bake your bread. These things you're allowed to make him do for you. But you can't make him the barber for the rabbin. The laundromat for the rabbin, the rabbin, or the barber for the rabbin, the rabbin, or the baker for the rabbin. That's not his profession. So you can make him. It is a profession, but it's not his profession. You can make him do it for you, but not for the rabbin. If that was his business before, then fine. Then that's something that you would have him do. But if it wasn't his business before, no. You're not allowed to teach him or force him to learn a new malacha. The only thing you're allowed to force him to do is whatever malacha he was doing before, now he continues on, but the profits go to you because you bought him as an Eved Ivri. That's halacha. Now, by the way, the Rambam just goes on to say, I didn't quote it because there's not much room. In this year, I have a klal, only one page. So the Rambam goes on to say that this is obviously only true for an Eved Ivri. If someone is not an Eved Ivri and he's just hiring himself out, then these limitations don't apply. So if a guy for whatever reason wants to hire himself out to be the guy that carries your robe to the mikveh, okay, as long as he's not officially an Eved Ivri. Or if the guy is an accountant and he says, you know what, I want you to hire me to be, let's start a franchise, a barber franchise, whatever it is. And okay, Zonteit. Within an Eved Ivri, these are the halachas. And the Rambam himself throws in a little bit of it's unique because the Mishnah Torah usually doesn't do this. But the Rambam, to explain why this is something that we're only makbah by an Eved Ivri and not anyone else, the Rambam says because an Eved Ivri is anyway tzebrachin. He's starting off in tzebrachin to go away. So now the fact that he's tzebrachin to begin with, and now he has to start a new career. So don't do that to him. But if a person is not an Eved Ivri, if that's what he wants to do, then that's fine. That's the halacha. Okay, so those are halachas of an Eved Ivri. Okay, like I always say, so that's the halacha. Now we have to investigate the previous. Okay, so how do we begin? Okay, so let's begin like this. I talked about this, not the same Indian, but at least the aside that this is coming from is similar to the aside that I spoke about Shal Shudas is coming from too, which is as follows. A person goes through life, and every single moment of life, basically our avodah. Everyone has a different avodah. Everyone has a different situation in life, different people that they deal with, different situations. But all of our avodah basically boils down to the avodah of what's called a birurim, of sifting, of being mavar birurim. The Rebbeinu Shalom made the world in such a way where it's toivavaya, right? It's utterly chaotic. Every single moment, every single experience of life that we face is a mixture of taiv and ra. Ever since the beginning of time, and specifically after the Yetzadas taiv and ra, everything's a mixture of taiv and ra. There's taiv and ra inside of us. There's taiv and ra inside of time, inside of experiences, conversations. Every situation you encounter and every part of yourself you meet is a mixture of taiv and ra. And your job is to take that moment, to take that part of yourself, take that experience, and to somehow uplift the nakuda of good, the nakuda of elikus that's in that moment somehow, and to connect it back to its source in Kedusha. How do you do that? Okay, so the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us a Torah and Shulchan Aruch to guide us to how to do that. So, Tesvav Tishrei in the morning, so you're about to encounter a moment of Taiv and Ra. How do you uplift that moment? Well, the Torah said, Sheikh Luv and Esrog. That's the avodah of that time. So by shaking Luv and Esrog at that moment, you're Mavar Berurim. You're taking that moment, which is until now, without that mitzvah, a moment of Toyavai, of Hester Panim, of concealment, of difficulty, with kernels of Elikos, with a spark of Kedusha. And your job is to be Mavar, is to elevate that spark. How do you do that? So whatever the mitzvah of the moment is telling you to do, that's the instruction of how to be Mavar that nitzitz. So sometimes it's Sheikh Luv and Esrog, sometimes it's saying a good morning, sometimes it's learning, davening, doing business properly, whatever the moment is machai, whatever the avodah of that moment is, it's being mavar birurim. Now, there's a lashon in the Arizal in the Sefer Eitz Chaim where it's very terse and dense, and there's a lot to unpackage in that line. But the line that we're about to see sort of tells us the following idea that there's shidduchim that the Rebbeinu Shalom makes between certain neshamas and certain sparks, certain neshamas and certain experiences. It's b'hashgacha pratis, when you live, where you live, what experiences you have throughout your particular day. Every moment that you have, every moment that you come in contact with is custom made for you specifically to somehow uplift that particular nitzitz that is contained in that moment and to return it to its place in Elikus, that place of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And there are certain sparks of Kedusha, that's what I was talking about by Shal Shudis. There are certain sparks of Kedusha that are embedded that are connected to your neshama, but they are not ready to be uplifted fully. And those are moments that have not yet to come. So when the Rebbeinu Shalom creates a person, the Rebbeinu Shalom, knows how many years to the second that the person has in the world. And the Rizal said that every single moment that a person is given in this world corresponds to the amount of nitzutze kedusha, the amount of sparks of elikus that their neshama specifically is custom made to uplift. But because so why is it that it's divided throughout time? Is because the only moment that you face is the moment that's fixable. But the moment that's ahead of the moment that's not yet to be, then that moment, the spark of that moment is not ready to be uplifted. It's too embedded in the klip, it's too embedded in tum, it's too embedded in ra. And so those moments you can't uplift. When the moment comes, it's a siman that now it's ready to be uplifted. So you have such an idea of, again, sparks of kedusha and elements of elikus that your particular neshama is made to uplift, made to fix, made to release from the world of klipa, the world of tumah, and to return it to elikus. And that's number one. And number two, not every spark that you're destined to uplift is ready for you right now. And by the way, not only is that true in terms of time, that moments that are not yet here are clear indicators that those nitzutze kedusha are not ready to be uplifted, but there's also some nitzutze kedusha that we're not allowed to actively engage in. So a person comes, so every time you eat something, you make a bracha on it, you're uplifting that spark of kedusha that was in that thing. And that piece of food was your food, it wasn't someone else's. There was a reason why you took that piece of fish and that guy took that piece of fish. That spark of kedusha was shaykh to your neshama at that moment, mamish at that moment. But what if it's a piece of chazer? So if it's a piece of chazer that you happen to pass by, it means it's shaykh to you. It means it's shaykh to you. But Chas v'Shalom, the Rebbeinu Shalom said that piece of chazer cannot be uplifted in that way. So what we're going to see soon is that even that piece of chazer that has a spark of kedusha, and the fact that it passed by, that you saw it, you smelled it, whatever, it was in your dal ramas, that means it's your spark. But you can't actively raise it. So the question we're also going to be dealing with is so how do you raise such a spark? How do you engage with it? Again, sparks that are not yet, sparks that are connected to moments in time that are not yet in the present. That also means they're not ready to be uplifted. But all it takes is just to wait. Right? You wait, and the time will come. But what about sparks that are part of my avodah to uplift, but I'm not allowed to uplift them in a direct way. So what do you do with that? But this is the idea. Every neshama has specifically its nitzutze kedusha that it's custom made in order to uplift. Every nitzutze kedusha has its time, its place. It's all shidduchim like that. Take a look at Marmukah number 5. This is a line from the Eitz Chaim, Shar Gimel Perek Beis. Now this line, like I said, is very dense, and we're going to unpackage at least a part of it soon. Said the Ari HaKadosh, Ein lecha yoyim shadayim lechaverta. No day is similar to another day. Whereas every day is different. It seems like the same Shachar Simcha Ma'ariv. It's altogether a different day. There's the sparks of Kedusha that you face on Monday is not the same that you're going to face on Tuesday. It's a different universe. Every day is different. And every tzaddik is different than another tzaddik. Every yid, again, think of it. Every yid has its own little universe. It's all Monday night for us, but your Monday night is not my Monday night, and your Monday night, everyone has a different Monday night. And the sparks of Kedusha that exist on Monday night for you are different than the sparks of Kedusha that exist for Monday night for you, and so on and so forth. Every day is different, and every tzaddik vis-a-vis that day is different. It's all different universes. And no creature is the same to each other. No spark is the same. No experience is the same. Everything is always different. And everything that was created is ultimately necessary for this process of raising these sparks. Now this is unclear what the Rizal means by this. Again, so far it's pretty clear. Every day is unique. Every tzaddik is unique. You have your sparks. And every spark has its time. Then the Rizal began to now mention every creation is different, and all that is created is part of this process. Ki ein yinikas kulam shava. Not everyone is yoinik. Not everyone draws their life force from the same place. That all goes back to Hashem, obviously. Afle tikkun kulam shava, and the tikkun that everything needs is also not the same. V'tesakin chelbena b'ktairis, mashal tesakin halavayna. And chelbena within ketairis has its own tikkun, as opposed to levayna in ketairis. So everything has its place. Even chelbena makes its tikkunim within ketairis that levayna can't do. Again, right? Chelbena is the sense, the ketairis that doesn't smell good, right? The spice that doesn't smell good. So that's always the example of, Chazal use that as lashon for Rishayim and so on. So it said there is even chelbena dika people. There's tikkun the chelbena does that levayna can't do. Okay, so what does the Rizal mean over here? So it's hard to unpackage it, 100%. But in Marmuk number 6, this is a Torah from the Karen Shleima. Karen Shleima is one of the Sfardishim Mekubalim, late 1800s. It's a classic sefer on Eitz Chaim. So the Karen Shleima, he's focusing on the last part of the sentence from the Eitz Chaim. Again, the first part, well, it's pretty clear. Every day is different. Every tzaddik is different. You have your nitzutzi kedusha, I have my nitzutzi kedusha, and finish. We all have our avodas. Fine. But then the Rizal start talking about other creations, and they're also necessary. And chelbena does things that levayna can't do. What does he mean by that? So it says the Kerem Shalom like this. Again, the first part is going to be similar to what we just said. So it'll be a little chazar. It says like this. The secret is as follows. Ki k'moisha olam es atzman. When the Rebbeinu Shalom created the world, the purpose of creation was for the universes to be fixed, for them to be clarified, for the toiv, for the good to be separated from the bad, and to return the good to its source above. In other words, to redeem the sparks, to elevate elikus, to allow kedusha to blossom from every moment. Kachu inyan ikar habrias. That's exactly also what the world is created for that, and we're created to facilitate that. To separate the evil from the good. To bring the good back to its shirish. That's the avodah of life. This happens both by tzaddikim and rishayim. So tzaddikim do this and rishayim do this, whether they realize it or not. So how does that happen? It says like this. So how did tzaddikim do this? So he do a bar lakol. That's not such a big, such big task to figure that out. Everything that tzaddik does is about trying to serve Hashem in every moment, which basically means to try to find the kedusha from amongst the tumah of this world, and to bring that spark of kedusha, that element of elikus that was potential in that moment or hidden in that moment, and to return it to the bigger picture of the Rebbeinu Shalom's universe. Okay, the calls that they tefillasam, this is through their davening, through their learning, u'mitzvah through their mitzvahs, v'achilasam, through their eating, everything that they do, whether it be business, otherwise, everything they do is making these birur. He says the mardiga thing, and here let's bear in mind this is true for tzaddikim, but again, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have to be the biggest tzaddik. Every yid has their slot. You have your nitzutzik. That was the first line of the Eitz Chaim, that every day is different, every tzaddik is different. You have your own avodah. Every yid has their Indian, and like I said, the Rizal writes other places that every moment, when the Rebbeinu Shalom but he decides how long you're going to live. It's based on how many sparks you're mechuyev to raise. So that's true. But said the Kerem Shalom like this: But in order to allow the tzaddik to do his avodah, then there has to be a lot of people involved to facilitate that. So what does that mean? He says like this: Kimi yachlam achila. The tzaddik, let's say, who's going to get him his food? Again, even if he's working, we're not talking about a tzaddik necessarily that's only sitting and learning all day. But if a tzaddik, he's an accountant, he's a big tzaddik, he's not a baker. So like someone has to make food for him. He's then going to go buy it in the store, but someone has to make the food. Umi chayrish, mi zerei, who's plowing, who's sowing? Mi kaitzer, who's harvesting? Mi misakin lapas vatavshel, who's making the bread and the food that he's going to eat? Mi might see avnei zav kesef. Who's excavating, the gold and the silver from the ground to eventually turn into coins that this tzaddik uses as money to buy the food. So he's not living in a bubble. There's an infinite amount of people and of efforts that are necessary to allow the tzaddik to do his avodah. Umi aisel lana begadim, who's making the clothing. Asher dover zotarach rav. That's a big deal. He's not doing it all himself. So who's doing all of that? The chol elo aminim. All these things. Kulam yeshvim chelkat toiv. So here's Zak the Karam Shlomo like this. The system of nitzutze kedusha vis-a-vis neshamas are more complicated than just like, okay, you have your nitzutze kedusha, you have your nitzutze kedusha, you have yours and finished, and whatever nitzutze kedusha you have, you work on them and you raise them to Hashem. You take them out of Tumah and Zeh. Says the Karam Shlomo, it's deeper than that. It's more complicated than that, because just like I said before, that the sparks of kedusha, they have to be ready for you to uplift. So I gave an example of sparks that are not ready. How are they? What do I mean sparks that are not ready? Let's say they're sparks of 2 days from now. So they're simply not here yet. But says the Karam Shlomo, but even sparks that are here, they could also not be ready for you. And what do I mean they're not ready? In other words, the food didn't make it to your table yet. You have a piece of wheat, right? Let's put it this way: you have a piece of wheat. And this piece of wheat is ultimately going to eventually become part of the piece of bread that the tzaddik is going to eat. And which means that the tzaddik spark that he's supposed to fix is in that piece of wheat. Master. But the fact that he doesn't have the piece of wheat yet, and it takes a whole avodah for this piece of wheat to get to his table, is an indicator that spark is not ready yet. That spark is far down in Tumah. It's deeply rooted in Klippa. And the tzaddik is too sensitive to deal with it on that plane, on that level. So what does he do? So what he needs to have, therefore, are people that are less sensitive, that sort of descend into that lower stratosphere, into the lower level. Not to say that the piece of wheat is be'etzem, like, dirtier than the piece of bread. We're talking about spiritually speaking. The farther it is from its final destination, the more vehement it is that spark is more deeply embedded in Ra and in Tumah. And so the tzaddik is not ready to deal with it yet. It has to be dealt with by other people, okay? Other people who are able, so to speak, to go to that lower place, and their avodah vis-a-vis that spark is not to raise it to Elokus yet, because that's the tzaddik spark, okay? And he's going to do it when he's able to. What they have to do is get it to him. And so, if you could imagine, it's like, when it gets to the roof, so to speak, when the spark is raised to the roof, the tzaddik can take the roof and throw it to heaven. A silly example like that. But who's going to get it to the roof? If it starts off on the roof, then fine. The tzaddik's on the roof. He takes the spark, brings it to God. It's fine. But if the spark started off in the basement, the tzaddik can't go to the basement. So what happens? So you need someone else who is a basement dweller to raise it up. Now that basement dweller is not able to get it to Shemayim because he's in the basement. But what he can do is get it to the first floor. And then a guy on the first floor can't get it to Shemayim, but at least he can get it to the second floor. V'chulu, until finally it gets to the roof, and now the tzaddik can do it. So says the Karam Shlomo, this is how Nitzutze Kedusha work. Now, that guy in the basement, he's in the basement, now this is where it gets complicated, he's in the basement vis-a-vis the tzaddik. But that guy in the basement might have his own independent Nitzutze Kedusha that he brings to Shemayim. But those Nitzutze Kedusha that are the tzaddik's Nitzutze Kedusha, it could very well be that guy in the basement has 2 jobs on his hand. He has to do his own inyanim, but he also has to help facilitate the tzaddik do his avodah. And these are 2 different categories of Nitzutze Kedusha that he has to do. His own inyanim, and to facilitate the tzaddik doing his inyanim. So the Karam Shlomo like this. So the 4 lines before the end of the first paragraph by 6. The kol elominim, and all these things, the wool that eventually becomes the shirt, all these things that the tzaddik wears. They all have toiv and a spark of kedusha that's swallowed up in them, that's embedded in them. The habir shalahem, and how do they become clarified? So their ultimate clarification is by the tzaddik. But the beginning of that process doesn't start with the tzaddik. The beginning of that process starts in the basement, or out in the field somewhere, or in the caves that the guys are excavating diamonds. Al yidei shehem mo'ilim u'mahanim latzadikim liYisrael. So through the fact that ultimately, through many steps, they are ultimately helping the tzaddik or any yid to do what they have to do to wear the piece of clothing. Then that's their chelik. Al yidei hanosh enenem hem tzadikim al tzaddik al yodam, through the benefit that the tzaddik has through these other people that start the process much further away. Now the tzaddik is able to serve Hashem with the article of clothing, but that article of clothing only got to the tzaddik because of all the millions of steps that preceded it. And now the tzaddik is able to make the ultimate birur on that spark through the help of these other people. Obviously, with this system, you can have many different madrigas, right? So you can have a situation of where there's only one, the tzaddik is only one step removed from the beginning, right? Sometimes the tzaddik is 2 steps removed. Sometimes 3 steps removed. And by the way, the Kerem Shlomo talks about this, and you find this in other svarim. This is how even goyim are shaykh to the avodah birurim. Goyim certainly aren't able to be mavar birurim in such a way to bring them to elikos. They don't have a shaykhs to that, but they're also part of the tikkun. How are they part of the tikkun? Because without an infrastructure of the world, including goyim, that we wouldn't be able to do what we do. Like Rabbi Yehuda said by Lag Baimer, right? The Gemara in Shabbos. Listen to all the gesharim, the chulu. So Rabbi Yehuda said it. There's truth to that, right? So they're part of the birur and the tikkun that we have to do. This is all what the Arizal meant in Maramaka number 5. Let's just read it again. Now you'll see what he means. No day is the same as another day. Ain't tzadik dam l'chaverta, right? The ein bir yadam l'chaverta. Everything is different. Everything is unique. Everyone has their own sparks. But b'chol hanivram kulin tzarich gavoya, and everything was created for this avodah. In other words, even goyim, even animals, as we'll see in a second. Everything is part of this avodah. Ke'ein yinikas kulam shava. Not everyone is yoinik from the same place. In other words, the tzaddik has a high yinika, and goyim lahavdil have a lower yinika. But they're all, but because they have a lower yinika, they facilitate the birur. So in other words, I mentioned before, you have a piece of chazer. So you pass by a McDonald's. It's bashkacha pratis. You pass by the McDonald's. It means that on some level, all the food that is in that place that maybe you not directly saw, but you had a shaykhs to by passing by, it means on some level it's shaykh to your neshama. It means that you're responsible to raise them up. How do you raise them up? You're not allowed to eat it. But it means that the goyim that do eat in McDonald's, you never met them in your life, and you shouldn't. But somehow those goyim are part of society functioning. And we're using our lights in this room right now to be able to learn. Mistama, there was a guy in a McDonald's somewhere that one of us passed by that somehow, because of his job or directly, who knows, we have lights on. And so the spark of Kedusha that guy digested in order to give him the energy to do his inyan, at some point, somewhere down the line, we have benefit from that inyan. And that's how that spark is slowly but surely getting to us. And then when we raise it, that's called us raising not only the spark of this moment directly, but we're also raising up the sparks of all those treifa foods and all those crazy experiences that maybe someone not as holy and sensitive as us might have experienced. If a guy, to say these lashonos, but it is true. If a guy has like some crazy, not good experience, but it gets him like energized to do work better, you know what I mean? And then whatever goes on in their lives, they carry that in order to move on in the world and to build society. And we benefit from that. And that's called us raising up all those sparks. Now take a look at this, the last paragraph. So he says amazing things. So again, says the Kerem Shlomo, Now, all of this, so it's an amazing thing. Even though that means that this guy that's working in the diamond caves, whatever it is, in order to excavate diamonds or gold and silver to make currency, v'chulu v'chulu. So that means it could be that the vast majority of his life is dedicated for someone else's nitzutz kedusha, right? It's not his own personal avodah, right? That could be. Ain't it tmiyah? That should not shock us. Ki afshush is a rive of a dosai. Could be that's his main tachlis in the world is taka just to facilitate someone else to raise their sparks, and his main avodah is to just get things from the basement to the roof. That could be his main avodah. But again, he'll still have his own inyanim. If he's a yid, we're talking about that he'll have his own inyanim. But it could be that the ikar purpose of his creation is not for his own inyanim. That could be. It could be that his inyan is primarily to help out the Talmud Chacham. Based on this, mistakal adam, v'yavid v'yadam milsa l'milsa. If you think about this and just how complex and how deep the network goes, as yaska b'chachmas habayra, you'll realize the amazing chachma of the Creator. Shekulam tzrichim zelazeh. How He created the world in such a way that everyone needs everyone. No one is in isolation. The kulam l'tzarach gavai, and everything was ultimately there in order to eventually get to that place of raising the spark to kedusha. And no one can do this without anyone else. The chein tovin v'taskel al briyos kulam. Now he says the next thing. Not only is this true for people that are not tzaddikim and tamid chachamim, and not only is this true for goyim even lahavdil, this is also even true for animals and creatures. That what hein doimim, hein samech, hein chai, all reality. So, in order for us to walk to shul, there has to be ground under our feet. Yeah. In order for us to drive to shul, there had to be metal that we're using in the car to get to shul. So those are also they're also part of this avodah of raising the sparks. Yeah, so they're part. They facilitate that. Kilatam, and he says Merdik is that because of this, the Rizal was makbid not to kill any creature, big or small. Even like mosquitoes or things like that would bite and that would cause the annoyance and even pain. The Rizal was makbid not to kill them. He would say they're doing the shlichus of their banish. Why should I stop them? So he says, why is a person getting a mosquito bite, right? Or a bee sting, things like that. The guy needs a tikkun. The guy needs a tikkun. Is it a very did something? He needs to be awakened to do tshuva. In other words, think again. What does it mean he didn't have ver? What does it mean he needs to do tshuva? It means there's an element of his life that's still mixed up with good and evil. There's a beer that needs to take place in his neshama. In other words, there's a spark of kedusha in that part of his life that needs to be elevated, but it's deeply rooted, deep down. So in order to get that spark to the surface, so we need a mosquito, and the mosquito comes and gives him a mosquito bite, and he's itchy and it annoys him. If he has seichel to him, what will he say? He'll say, Rabbanu Shalom, why'd you give me a mosquito bite? It must be because I have to do tshuva. And then what happened? The mosquito did its avodah. The mosquito got the nitzis of kedusha to the surface, and now he's able to raise it up. If the guy's a shaita that he won't think of it like that, then the Rabbanu will have to send something worse than a mosquito. But said there is, I'm going to kill a mosquito. He's on a shlichus. He has to do that. So he says, Gizeh chayev akitza misiba ezav, and this guy needs to be bet, for whatever the reason. V'zuha biri bolasachna, and this mosquito, this creature is coming to be masakin him. Kedei lanakas avodah, that he should clean himself out from that avera. Ve'echi harag shlich shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. Why should I kill? So the reason the shlich of Hashem. Ki yesh chelak toiv b'zahabiria. There's a spark of kedusha that is part of this creature, and there's a spark of kedusha of the chelak atov shel hu tikunai, and that spark of kedusha that's shaykh to this creature, shaykh to that spark inside that guy that needs to be brought from the basement to the roof. And that's exactly what it's doing. So should I stop that? So this is a murder chiddush. So another sachaka. What you see from here is that there's two strata that a person has in their avodah Hashem. There's your own nitzutz kedusha, it's your own avodah. And how do you find your place? Okay, you make shidduchim. You find where you're supposed to go. The tide of life takes you where you're supposed to go, and those are the sparks of kedusha that you're supposed to raise. Then there's another inyan, which is there are sparks that for tzaddikim, and other people. Their avodah can be to facilitate the sparks of those tzaddikim. Fine. You guys remember what we were talking about? Okay, Eved Ivri. Yeah, fine. It's Eved Ivri. what's the pneumius of all these mitzvahs that we had before the beginning of an Eved Ivri? The nakuda that I think that these mitzvahs are trying to bring out is that an Eved Ivri, the Baal Bas might think of the Eved Ivri as follows: that by becoming an Eved Ivri, he doesn't have his own sparks anymore. His whole avodah is just to facilitate my sparks. I am the tzaddik and he is the guy vis-a-vis our lives. Until he became an Eved Ivri, he was a Yid and I was a Yid, and we were shav b'shava. We were equal to each other. You know, he had his avodah, I had my avodah. Finished. My avodah meant living here. His avodah meant living here. But be'etzem we were equal. Also, he becomes an Eved Ivri. So there's a hava mina. That something changed. What changed? He doesn't have his own avodah anymore. His entire avodah now is to raise sparks from my basement to my roof. That's his all. Comes these Lavin, and Lavin says, not true. His essence is not to be tuffle to your avodah. He still has his own avodah. What happened? Nothing happened. He just, the tide of life took him to these circumstances. But don't think of him as tuffle to you in terms of his avodah. He still has his own personal avodah. Why is it that his sparks are now found, in my orbit? Kacha, that's the way it is. No different than any employee, right? Anytime that the person has an employee, that means the employee doesn't have his own sparks. Has v'shalom. He has his own avodah. Happens to be, for whatever reason, Hashgacha Pratis, Chachmas Halyoina determined that the sparks that he's meant to raise somehow are found in the business that you run. Okay. But so too is with an Eved Ivri. Every single one of these lavin are coming lafuke from such a havamina that all the Eved Ivri is just tuffle to your avodah. Selling him on the market in an open way, with what's it called, bidding, like a bidding war. That means that all his mitzias is just other people. That's what it means. Something that's bekovedik, something that's sanua, means it has a sense of self, a sense of self. Something that doesn't have a sense of self, it's mamish a davar hefker. Something that's mamish completely rabim-dik, completely others-dik. That's something that you have a bidding war on. But something that is his own, that's a private entity by itself. It's just a matter of figuring out of what is the hashgacha prat of this guy's life, what house, what estate is he going to be brought to? But not because he's be'etzem tuffle to any estate. In other words, the havamina would be that the Eved Ivri is just emptied out of his own personality. All he is now is just a facilitator of other people's nitzutz kedusha. In that case, okay, the highest bidder, because he doesn't have a zich. He doesn't have a sense of self. He doesn't have his own avodah. Comes the pasuk, loy simkru mekerasav. Don't sell him like that, because he does have his own avodah. His own avodah, nothing's changed. The etzem his avodah is always what it is. No, and because of that, if he wants to be bought, it's not like davar hefker. He's not becoming part of your universe. It's still his own universe. So you have to treat him with kavod and dignity and sinner like that. He's not just a piece of ground that you walk on. He's not a mosquito flying through the air. He has his own avodah. And your avodas are now related to each other. They're now dealing in the same arena, but it's a separate. But he has his own avodah. So too the avodah, the mitzvah of lois aved by befarach, right? Not to make him work avodas parach. I said before, what's the definition of parach? So Rambam said 2 points, but as the way we were magdir before is that the definition of avodas parach means that his avodah is something that has a tachlis. It's not just an open-ended thing without a tachlis or just open-ended. In other words, again, seeing him as someone who does not have his own nitzutz kedusha anymore, that all he is, his entire shlichus in the world is just legabe me. He doesn't have his own avodah anymore. Then every avodah, then the halacha would be I could tell him to do whatever I want because it's meaningless anyway. His avodah is fundamentally meaningless unless it helps me. So there's no. So I'll tell him to do whatever I want if it makes me happy. If I want to do it, I tell him. But the answer is lois avodah. Don't do that to him because he has his own avodah. Every work that he's doing, he might be doing it in your mansion or in your estate or whatever, but it's his avodah, and his avodah bears his tachlis. And so avodas parach means that his avodah does not have his tachlis. His avodah has my tachlis. His avodah is completely what I want it to be. as far as he's concerned, it's open-ended, which means it doesn't lead to anything. And maybe it doesn't maybe practice doesn't lead to anything. That would all be an expression of the belief that he doesn't have his avodah. He no longer has avodas habirurim. The answer is lo yisaveh avodas baruch. And the same thing with the final halacha of lo yisaveh avodas aved, not to make him do work which is mavuzatek. What's the gather of that? Things that are not a profession, you can't make him do, and even things that are a profession, you can't make him become that profession. Why? Because that's the point. If all he's there to do is facilitate your nitzutz kedusha, then that would express itself as let him take off your shoes and let him schlep your robe. That's his avodah now. His avodah, he's a gabbai. That's his avodah, right? But that's not true. That's not the truth. And more than that, if I'm the baker, if I have a bakery, right, and I need people, so that means bashkacha part. My nitzutz kedusha are revolving around baked goods. So if the whole inyan of Eved Ivri is to facilitate my nitzutz kedusha, then you know what I just bought? I bought another baker. But the answer is that's not what you bought. He's his own person with his own avodah, with his own nitzutz kedusha. And guess what? His nitzutz kedusha do not fundamentally shift from before he was an Eved to now. And before he was an Eved, the nitzutz kedusha revolving around his life were in accounting. Guess what? It stays in accounting because he's not becoming just bottle to you. He's an independent person. And this is fundamentally also the mitzvah, like we didn't see this inside, but kitoiv la'imach, that you have to treat him as an equal. You live in this house, then he lives in that house. You live in this type of area, he lives in that type of area. All of a sudden, because that's what we're trying to establish in Eved Ivri, that he's not just tough to you, he has his own avodah. Happens to be, it's true, that because of where he's holding now in life, maybe because of that verse that he did, so his Monday night is maybe not as exciting as other people's Monday nights, and his nitzutz kedusha maybe are not as they need a little bit more work than other people's, but they're his, and so this is the major inyan, in hashkafa that comes out of this is mamish a huge inyan. That again, this doesn't mean that the Eved Ivri could be an Am Haaretz, and it could be that part of his life is to raise sparks from the basement to the roof for someone, but lav dafka the balabas. You know what I'm saying? So there's this system that the Kerem Shlomo laid out, which is everyone has their nitzutz kedusha, but there's also such an inyan that a person's shlichus in the world might be somewhat, or even maybe predominantly, about helping other people in their nitzutz kedusha. That could still be true for the Eved Ivri, but it has nothing to do with him being an Eved Ivri. That's just that everyone is like that. The balabas could also. The balabas is a baker, right? He has a bakery franchise. So it could very well be that the main thing in his life is to facilitate tzaddikim eating food. Okay, the Eved Ivri doesn't change anything. That's the chiddush of Eved Ivri. He's being sold, and this is just the direction that his life is taking him, guiding him through his life, bringing him to his personal avodah. Nothing to do with him becoming tafel the Am Haaretz. This is why we find it's a major inyan that you see such a thing. Everyone has their shlichus, but there's also an inyan of helping other people and facilitating them, and that could be a person's primary shlichus in life as well. But just because a person works for someone, or just because a person finds themselves in such a scenario where it looks like their inyan is dependent on this other person, it's b'chlal lav dafka that's your inyan to help that person out, or you still have your independent existence. It happens to be the Rebbeinu Shalom made in such a way that Mars Ayin and B'derech HaTeva, it looks like you're tully in that balabas. But it's b'chlal not. The Rebbeinu Shalom looks at every employee and every employer shav b'shav. That's the side of Eved Ivri. Everyone is shav b'shav. Even if in a world of Hester Panim, it looks like this guy's on top, this guy's on the bottom, this guy is the ikr, this guy's the tafel. That's all demyanis. It's all demyanis, and it's all maris ayin. It's all Hester Panim. The truth is, every year, Amir Kol Sadikim, Ki Toiv La'yimach, the Balabas and the Eved Ivri are seen as shav b'shava, and it could very well be that the Eved Ivri is the tzaddik, and the Balabas is the Am Haaretz facilitating the tzaddik. You never know. You never know how these things work. Rabbi Nachman writes in one place, which is end with this. Rabbi Nachman writes in one place in the Chut Maran, Amir Kol Sadikim, but there's different madrigas of tzaddikim. And Rabbi Nachman says that you can have a yid who is mamish a schlepper in the street, and people pass by, give him quarters. Maybe he himself doesn't even know who he is, and the whole world is telling him. It's such a thing. You don't know. So it's Allah l'mais. It means you look at a yid, whatever their financial situation, whatever their social situation might be, shava b'shava, because you don't know. Maybe you're dependent on him, maybe he's dependent on you, maybe neither of you are dependent on each other. So you have to be machmer, down the kaf schus. Everyone is kitayv la'imach. Okay, Hashem Shalom, we should be zeichet to be malor all our need to take kedusha for ourselves, for others, and be zeichet to see the gula through that. The Rachamim be as called tzedek.